are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and with me again is Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. You know, we talked about being in the summer dregs last time, and
even more so this time.
Kyle Dubas is doing some exciting stuff, but he's about it. We don't have a whole lot to get into today. Off the top here, I did want to mention our social media. Follow us on X, Twitter, whatever it's called, at YWT Podcast. Kevin's at Kevin_Durso everywhere. We're working on that. That's a weird thing. Follow us on Sports Talk Philly as well.
I literally just keep saying follow on social media, like you said right off the top, because it's way easier than trying to figure out what the names of anything is anymore.
Absolutely. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that like button. Thank you.
There's one that's not going anywhere anytime soon. No. YouTube is YouTube. There you go.
You are not wrong. All right. So first things first, we do have a little bit of Flyers news to get into here. It's not a whole lot. Sam Ersson, who is somewhere between second and fourth in the depth chart, depending on how things shake out here, signed a 2-year extension. He does have 1 year remaining on his current deal, but this does extend him through 25-26 at $1.45 million, which is a fantastic number.
Yeah, so this is like, last season, Travis Sanheim fell into this category. This is getting ahead of the final year of the contract. And realistically,
well, this one might age a little better than that one.
Well, yeah, but it's realistically, it's checking off an item that could have waited until next offseason, but you're really getting ahead here.
Sure.
The value's great. I mean, the value is great for what he seems like he's able to contribute. And, I get it. It's not, he didn't have the largest sample size over the course of, from an NHL perspective anyway. I believe that the final totals were 12 games. He had a 6-3 record. It's like you kind of know what you're working with. He did have a shutout.
899 save percentage, goals against just above 3. Not great numbers, but again, not a good team in front of him. So,
and it depended on when you looked at it too, because let's remember, like, his NHL debut was a 6-5 loss to Carolina. That was like just a total mess, and he didn't play the whole game, so that makes your goals against go higher than the typical number.
And for what it's worth, 42 games with the Phantoms. 284 goals against, 900 save percentage, which, again, the AHL, the goalie numbers get a little wonky, but still solid numbers for a player in his first real full season on North American ice.
Exactly. And it was the flashes of what you saw, too. Like, let's not forget, the NHL debut was, I don't want to call it terrible, because he really got left out to dry in that game against Carolina, but he comes back into a game because that was a game where Carter Hart got hurt. He comes back in to finish off the game. They're losing at that point. I think it was 6-2 when he came back into the game, and they come back to cut it to 6-5 before and he doesn't actually end up taking the loss as a result of that, because he's not the goalie of record on the goal that was the game winner. And then after that, he starts getting more starts and he starts getting wins. He won 5, either 5 or all 6 in a row. And then down the stretch, they were just such a brutal, they were a brutal team to watch. And he kind of was just on the hook for some of that rough stuff, like that's just the way it is. But he reeled off 6 wins in a row. And that included a couple. I mean, he had one game where he had some really solid performances. He obviously, like, there's one game in there he had a shutout. And he had another where I think it was 40 seconds away from a shutout. And he he looked like he was on the verge of it then. So you're talking about 2 games where he played 59 plus minutes and didn't give up anything.
2 games where he stole you the game.
Pretty close to.
Did his best.
The game where he actually got the shutout was against Buffalo. I wouldn't say he necessarily stole that one, because the team won 4-0. Right. But some of the other ones, like, he's right. He's right on it, and he looked really good over the course of those handful of games. And it's important to recognize that during that time in particular, because that was at a time when they were dealing with some injuries in goal. So he was going to be a natural call up, because he was really the best thing they had in the minors. And during that time, he was giving you performances that Felix Sandstrom wasn't giving you. So he was getting more attention. Like, there was a lot of talk that he was the best goalie out of camp, realistically speaking, because they really didn't get to showcase Carter Hart that much in camp. So he was getting a lot of ice time in preseason games and looking really good. And then he got a call up and he looks really good again. And all of a sudden, like, John Tortorella's even talking, and John Tortorella does not like talking about his goalies too much. but he's at least looking at it and going, he's given us something, like, and we want to keep seeing him.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. And the intrigue in him is very real. Yes, it is a small sample, and it's only going to grow as the years go on. It's definitely going to grow next season.
Sure.
And there is a reason to believe that once and again, I don't want to spend too much time because I know this is first of all, this is the first place everybody goes when they see any other goalie mentioned. Number one, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on that because there's really nothing to talk about right now.
What's going on with Carter Hart, and obviously that's all pending.
But once you get an answer, because there's there is a lot of reason to believe that either Carter Hart is part of this and that ruins his hockey career anyway, or he's not part of it and he's getting traded.
Right.
There's a lot of reason to believe one or the other.
We all know how this is going to work out. The report's going to drop, and then the next day at 2 p.m., somewhere between 7 and 11 names are going to come out for termination. Probably.
Potentially.
And then the other names on that list will probably be in some form or fashion cleared, and Carter Hart will become a very valuable trade asset and still a goalie making less than $4 million as he enters his physical prime, all these things about Carter Hart.
Right. And I don't even know if that's important this year anymore because we're kind of at that point of the off season where it's going to be a lot trickier for things like that. If he were to be cleared, like if he were to be cleared tomorrow, which let's be real, that's not happening. We've been spending the last 3 weeks thinking that maybe something was coming down the pipe at some point here and nothing's happened. So at this point, it is really pointless to talk about something that not a lot of people really have even any clue on, let alone,
Sure.
I'm not trying to sit there and say there's not stuff that's out there. Everybody who is around the game is probably hearing some things. Right. The problem is that this is not the same thing as hearing about a trade or a signing and thinking, hey, if you guessed but if you were told some information and
if you were told Joel Quenneville got hired as the Flyers coach, for example.
Okay. Well, that doesn't sound very good either.
Well, what I mean is that's not necessarily information that will ruin your career if you get that wrong.
Well, exactly. The idea that people know it and aren't sharing it is completely ridiculous because what you don't understand if you're feeling that way is that you get any piece of information wrong by reporting anything that you think you know, and it's career suicide. Yep. And it's worse than career suicide because forget about the fact that your career is over. You're going to get hit with lawsuits.
I was going to say, you're looking at defamation lawsuits.
Right, it's a defamation lawsuit waiting to happen. So not only do you need to be backed up by so many sources that it's almost impossible to get that number.
You need about 11 sources.
No, closer than that.
And there's only 8 people in the room.
Well, closer than that, you practically need the physical report in your hand.
That's fair.
To be able to sit there and say with confidence, this is who's in it. And you can
no journalist short of Rick Westhead is willing to run with that. And if Rick Westhead says it, it's true. So
because if
he's not going to.
No, because if he says it, and he's probably sitting down with somebody who can directly identify the people involved, or has
the report, yes. Right?
Exactly. That's how these types of things. And let's be clear about something else. The report that everybody is waiting on, that is concluded and done, and should reveal some information.
Should be released. Yeah.
Well, it should be released, but it's an NHL investigation. It was an independent investigation conducted by the NHL. That's not criminal.
Right.
The police department's supposed to also run the same kind of investigation process and be able to come out with criminal charges that then kind of double down on this. Because, there is an element of this where, yes, is the league potentially trying to hope that some stuff blows over from this and that, or at least, and certainly the players involved are because at the end of the day, do you really think that 5 because that's been the common thing. There's 5 of them from that Canadian junior. Okay. I mean, there's more people involved, I'm sure, but it doesn't mean that they were all on the Canadian junior roster.
Okay.
They're talking about 5 off of that roster. And out of those 5, do you think that anybody, at the end of the day, everybody's going to sit there and say, it wasn't me, and I'm willing to put that forward? Which means that there's people who are going to bold-faced lie to you about their involvement, and then it's later going to be revealed, no, they were. You know what I mean?
To be fair, if you're the kind of person to do Action A who's not to say you're one to lie?
Well,
let's
well,
be
no,
honest.
because it's the same thing. You're like,
Yep.
you've got people who are now pointing the finger at, well, the media should know something. How about they do their jobs and put it out there? If you're wrong, you're ruining your career.
You're
and the
done.
player is thinking the same thing. Yeah, maybe I know I did this, but if I say I did without any evidence to actually point the, like, hey, smoking gun in hand, I did it, then I'm ruining my own career.
So in an effort
That's the way they think.
In an effort to steer it back towards hockey, I do want to.
And like more positive stuff because we're on Sam Ersson.
I do want to talk about the fact real quick that, okay, let's assume, again, and we've done this on the show before here, let's assume that Carter Hart is cleared, is not one of the people closely involved here.
Sure.
You mentioned that he might not get moved. I'm not so sure about that because $4 million is not a lot of money. And I know the cap is tight and I know this, that, the other, but he's making a very, very, very reasonable amount. And I think pretty much any team moving pieces back can find a way to throw $2 to $4 million in the deal depending on retention.
Potentially, my issue isn't that it's not. If they
were you talking about from an assets perspective?
Well, no. What I'm talking about is I'm talking about from a timing perspective because if they would have if everything would have happened as somewhat perceived before, which was. I mean, like we said, this was 2 weeks ago. It was the Friday. 2 weeks ago, it was, there might be something. Then we waited for the week after. Then it was the week after that. And it was like this window of end of July. Like we're past early August at this point.
Right. When does training camp start?
5 weeks, pretty much. I mean,
okay. So we still have a little time for that.
We do. But now that they're sitting here and telling, now that essentially the story is there's no timeline for this. You're not going to
bury this as hard as they can.
And you're not going to butt up against training camp and then be able to find a trade cleared or not. You know what I mean?
Fair.
Like,
that's what I'm fair.
And that's what I'm saying from that movement process. Like
silly me. I was operating on the assumption that we might actually get this data this summer at some point in time. But
that's the big problem too. Like if you're like, it's clear they're not like eagerly ready to reveal this.
Turns out Gary Bettman's a lawyer.
And I understand that there's like certain law aspects to this. That yes,
sure. You are putting real big, heavy information out there.
Well, and that's why I brought up the thing about the police investigation versus an NHL investigation because
they have to make sure that those two investigations are in tune with one another.
Well, not only that, but it's also in terms of the punishment too. Because if you come out as off of an NHL independent investigation and then say we're suspending guys for the whole year or whatever it is, right?
Life or whatever the case
whatever it may be.
Right.
It doesn't. I'll just say whole year because that feels like I don't know if it's substantial enough to fit the crime, but it's substantial. Like a year-long suspension is substantial.
I think you're going to hear indefinite or minimum suspension
potentially, and reinstatement's going to be needed if you ever want to play. Like I get that, but to do it off of an NHL independent investigation where there is no criminal charge against it can also create lawsuits.
That is fair. Then they have all they better have all their ducks in a row.
Right. So there's a lot of now. Granted, it's gone on for so long that you feel like this should already have all the ducks in a row because let's put it this way, the season wasn't over yet, and you said the investigation was complete. So either you were just sitting around waiting for whatever. Yes, I understand why you're potentially waiting for a deader period of the off season because as a league, you don't want it to overshadow the Stanley Cup final and you don't want it but the bottom line is that now you're going to a point where it's past that point.
The longer they sit on it, the worse it is.
Absolutely. And the longer you sit on it, the closer you get to its next training camp. Well, now we're into the new season.
No, I mean, I'm thinking they're like the kid who got caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing, and he got chances to tell the truth and get himself out of it, and got chances to tell the truth and get himself out of it, and he no. I think they're pushing it off as long as they can because
they're hoping people forget.
Because it's bad.
Well, right, it's bad, and they're hoping people forget, and people aren't going to forget.
Because it's not 5, it's 8, it's 9, it's 10.
And listen, five is off of a very loose report, and I get that. And to be fair, I don't even like. You're right. I think it was at least 5. It may not have been definitively. It's 5 people. Like
Right.
That's another category of it. Like, and that's how little information media members probably know about this that they can say. Like, you have to speak in terms of it's not definitely 5. It's at least 5.
Right.
Like, because now you're not short. You know what I mean? Like you're not selling yourself short on. Well, I said it was 5, and it turns out it's again. Another area where if you're wrong about anything, it kind of hurts your own credibility. Yeah. So you got to be careful with the language here. And it's why to an extent, the less that we know about it, the more it's not worth talking about the process itself. Right. We can talk about how bad it is, but it's also kind of worthless to talk about how bad it is on a weekly basis when it's like, that's all you can keep saying. It's just a broken record until you get to a point where it's like, just, it is what it is. We know how this league is trying to operate. We've seen it in many different avenues before, and it's going to continue to be that way. And it's just, it's gutless to an extent. I mean, it's really gutless to not come forward with this when you told people the investigation was done. That was out there.
Absolutely. And they are running and hiding, and we will see if and when that comes to a conclusion. But I think, is there anything else we wanted to say on Sam Ersson?
Just, I mean, like the whole point of bringing that up was the fact that there's a direct correlation because, again, it's a goaltender. If
the worst happens, realistically speaking, if the worst happens and Carter Hart is removed from the roster,
or suspended from it or whatever,
removed from the roster in one form or fashion.
It's what everything should be, but I get it. I understand.
Then realistically, Sam Ersson slides up a spot and is probably the backup on your NHL team this year.
I'm not even so sure about that. I think that there's a potential chance he could actually start if that were the case.
You think so?
Okay. Because I think that there are still, if you're looking at it from the way that I understood the way that John Tortorella talked about some stuff, I think there's still some trust issues with Sandstrom.
Okay.
Like that let's put it this way, remove Cal Peterson from the equation.
I was going to say they might just run a 3-man ship with Cal Peterson and kind of split
remove
the starts.
Peterson from the equation for 1 second. And if you asked me, Ersson's starting over Sandstrom.
Okay.
Like I think he's higher than Sandstrom on the depth chart now. It's the question about where Peterson falls in and how do they want to navigate that and all. Because there's people who believe that forget about the signing because it doesn't affect this year, obviously. But
sure.
Assuming Carter Hart is the starting goalie on opening night, there's only potentially one reason at this point why he wouldn't be.
Sure. Well, he could get hurt, theoretically, knock on wood.
Well, yes, I know, but you know what I mean. Like, why he wouldn't be the assumed starter is the point.
Right. Fair enough.
Then I kind of agree with people that I think Ersson would be your number 2 at this point. And that possibly Peterson's the guy who they throw on waivers and try to pass into the minors.
Right. Well, and the fact that LA couldn't get rid of that contract and kind of had to give up assets to move it in some form or fashion. That goes to show. I mean, he's probably going to clear, and he'll probably end up in Allentown.
Exactly, and until you need him, obviously,
for
whatever reason,
and you hope you don't, but you probably will because it's a long season, and every team goes through 3, 4, 5 goalies.
There's just a lot of reason to believe that, given the way that Ersson was talked about over the last calendar year, let's call it, because if you're going from training camp of last year when he kind of was still a relative unknown, and then all of a sudden looked pretty good in camp. Not all of a sudden. I mean, he's worked, obviously, but you know what I mean. Like, all of a sudden, he was much more on the radar after training camp than he was going into it.
He showed up looking good. Yeah.
Sure. And then he made appearances over the regular season, too.
And looked good in them, for the most part.
So now I think he's a greater part of this picture, almost to the point where I think people are also right about the possibility that he is a guy that you can look at in the future and then start to look to a handful of the other goalies. Kolosov. I don't want to jump the gun on Fedotov too much because there's a whole lot. There's a lot and we'll discuss one thing on that in a couple minutes. But his age makes it a little questionable. But okay, how about these other 2 goalies they just drafted? How about Bjarnason, for example, or you know what I mean? Like, there's reason to believe that they've got enough goalies in the pipeline now from Ersson down. Because Kolosov's 21 and they just drafted 2 more 18-year-olds to be part of this pipeline.
Yeah.
They might be already looking to those guys, that collective group of 4, and saying,
there are our goalies.
They're the goalies going forward potentially. Yeah. And for right now, like, let's put it this way. Nobody thinks that Cal Peterson's part of this for more than the next 2 years, right?
That's fair.
Like nobody's thinking that because by that point he's going to age himself out and price himself out.
Right. Well, and that's the other point. If he's willing to, fall into being a veteran backup, blah, 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 I could see a world where he stays, but I could see him going out and trying to, make some more money.
And what if he plays well too? Like that's the other part. Like what if he comes in and plays well enough that he thinks he can get a job? That's part of the equation as well. Man, so
if you rewound 36 months and told me Carter Hart wasn't, we were talking about a future without Carter Hart.
36. Well, yeah, 36 months is fair.
3 years, we're talking COVID bubble.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Then at that,
Come on. You tell me he's not going to be your goalie 5 years from then? Wow.
I thought I took, for whatever reason, my brain took 36 months and kind of treated it like, not like 36 hours, but like I did season and a half.
Oh, okay.
And went like, well, I don't know about that. Like, I don't feel like over a season ago people were talking
36
like
months
that,
is COVID bubble.
No, sir, 36 months is fair because yes, when we were doing shows coming out of the COVID bubble and all that stuff, he's the whole reason they had a chance to get to the conference final.
We were talking about him as creeping into the top 5 goalies in the world.
And for what it's worth, I wouldn't be surprised if he can still perform like a top 15, top 10. Like,
and that's the part that tears me because I know he's going to. He's going to go somewhere else. And
unless you realize that there's another reason that he won't. Like,
well, that's fair.
And that's
fair.
the
again, we're assuming that
we can't make
positively, and then he gets traded. For the record.
Oh, to become the high level. Yes. Which, I get you. All right. So that's really all we have on Ersson, and that was really the only signing. By the way, I guess to take something with the word contract in it, because there is still the issue of Morgan Frost and no contract yet and all that stuff like that. I mean, it'll eventually get resolved. Don't get me wrong, but I don't have any sense that anything was coming anytime soon. I mean, like,
at this point, I don't think anybody's worried about it.
Well, because it's going to happen at some point. It's just a matter of what's the number going to be, what's the term going to be, and kind of when in general, like how close to training camp are we going to get for something like this? Usually these types of deals resolve by the end of August because then that way guys are coming back and it's September and like nobody
they have a conversation or two.
Nobody really announces RFA deals after Labor Day.
Okay.
Like by Labor Day, it's usually like your business really better be done because now it's preparations for training camp. You're going to be 3 weeks away from training camp at that point. So you got to be pretty close at that point. Like you got to be pretty close to done at that point. But that's the one contract that's still out there that we really don't have anything on. And that's just worth a mention because again, like that was a big topic on the show a couple weeks ago. And it's like, you never know. Like to be honest, most of the time when a signing comes through in August, I'm usually really surprised, like not surprised at like maybe necessarily who it is. Like I get the understanding of it, but kind of like it almost pops up unexpectedly, right? Like, they're doing business today on this guy. Like, okay.
Well,
like
if you're surprised about signings in August,
yeah.
How about we talk about a trade in August?
Well, did you want to talk about this other little footnote?
Well, we'll jump on that later. It was too good a transition. I can't fight it here.
All right, and we have a couple of other August signings to bring up as well.
Yeah, early in August here, Kyle Dubas made his first big move as Penguins GM. And by big, I mean Erik freaking Karlsson. I mean 3 trades. I mean, what was it? Something like 14 assets? Big deal that very clearly took weeks.
Yeah. Do you want me to, I guess, read off the whole terms of the deal because it's a 3-team trade and there's a lot of pieces involved, so we can kind of.
Yeah, I have it too.
This pretty quickly. Okay,
so let's go by what everyone receives. So
sure. Now, do you want to do Pittsburgh first because they got the biggest piece? All right, go ahead. Pittsburgh
ends up with, and that's just how we're going to do this.
Yep.
Pittsburgh ends up with Erik Karlsson, Rem Pitlick, Dylan Hamiluk. I'm assuming that's how that's pronounced.
It looks right to me.
2026 third-round draft pick.
Yep.
They got the biggest piece. They got Erik Karlsson. Rem Pitlick is a solid little player, brother of former Flyer Tyler Pitlick.
Let me check on that, actually.
They are.
Are they?
I do know that from fantasy hockey purposes.
Okay. I wasn't.
They are brothers. And then, you do get a third round draft pick. It is several years from now.
Yeah, 2026.
Theoretically, San Jose is hoping that they're on the good side, we're on the better side of things by then, and start to push that towards the back.
To be
half
honest,
of the round.
even if they aren't, that sounds like the type of pick that if Pittsburgh's on,
it's going to be a deal
dealt.
somewhere else. Yeah,
like Dubas deals that later.
Absolutely. Moving over to Montreal, because they were just kind of in this deal.
They were the third team, yes.
Right, mostly to retain a little bit of salary on Erik Karlsson. We'll get into the salary breakdown in a minute. Montreal receives Pittsburgh's 2025 second. Jeff Petrie returns to the Montreal Canadiens. Casey DeSmith, who Pittsburgh has been trying to unload forever. That's part of making the salary work. And Nathan Lagar or Lagari, something along those lines.
I think it's Lagare actually
Lagare. Yeah. The biggest piece there is probably the second. Casey DeSmith is a solid option in goal. Jeff Petrie is probably going to get dealt at some point, I imagine.
It's talked about, yes.
Unless Montreal literally just needs the bodies. Again, they were here mostly to facilitate it via salary.
Mm-hmm.
And then San Jose got the biggest, obviously got kind of the bigger assets coming back. They were giving up the largest chunk, as in Erik Karlsson. They received Pittsburgh's 2024 first-round draft pick, which, I mean, the Penguins missed the playoffs this year. Like, that's not, I mean, it's very risky to trade your first a year out. But they do get that first-round draft pick. They do also get Michael Granlund. They get Jan Ruda. And from the Montreal Canadiens, they do get Mike Hoffman as well.
I do want to throw one caveat in on the draft pick thing, because it is conditional with the top 10 protection, which basically means, like, to your point,
if you spike the lottery.
Right. But if you were to miss the playoffs and win the lottery in some capacity, which, listen, missing the playoffs barely and winning the lottery is not first overall or anything, but it's still top 5.
See, but the thing is, I don't know if that's better for Pittsburgh, because then I assume it becomes a 2025 unprotected first. That is usually how these things go. And that pick might be even worse. Because,
yeah, it's true.
I mean, Pittsburgh's not getting better. Like, they're not a young core 4 here, especially adding Erik Karlsson. And yes, Erik Karlsson turned back the clocks and had an incredible season and won the Norris and looked like 2016, top of the world Erik Karlsson again. But you still have to be nervous that it was lightning in a bottle, that you are paying for an asset that has only had one good season over the last 5 or so. Man, it's a risky trade out of Kyle Dubas, but he's doing what Ron Hextall was not. He is moving significant future pieces, a first-round pick, a second-round pick, multiple other assets, to try to win a cup with the 3, well, now 4.
So here's where I'm at with this, because so this trade happened a week ago, by the way. This was August 6th that the trade went down.
We've had a little bit of time to reflect on.
Well, I know. And then there was a signing that happened a couple days earlier than this by two teams that it feels like are trying to squeeze every last drop out of their superstars.
Okay.
Now, I didn't tell you what the team making the signing was that's doing that, but I'm sure you can figure it out by the time I'm done talking about the Erik Karlsson trade. Because I'll talk about that first, just on its own.
Okay.
I think that this makes the Pittsburgh Penguins a better team next season.
I agree with you.
I think that's fair to say, because yes, you still have all of those pieces that still put up good point totals. You still have Crosby and Malkin and Letang.
And as far as your roster goes, the biggest asset you gave up was Michael Granlund,
who wasn't really a good fit there anyway. Let's be real.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, you didn't give up any, as far as your roster assets, you didn't really give up a whole.
Right. I mean, because having
nothing that's not replaceable.
Because having Petrie wasn't a big, they didn't have him for long, so he wasn't really an established member of that group per se. DeSmith was their backup, and they obviously just latched on to Jari for a long-term extension, so that's another key to that.
And they've been actively shopping DeSmith for months.
And Jan Ruud is the other piece that they gave up, realistically speaking. And again, I mean, I guess, let's just wait. You're giving up two. But you're giving up 2 defensemen to get the reigning Norris winner. Hello? I think you're going to do that if it came to it, right? The thing that kind of and one caveat to the whole core group for a second here, because I said like you still have Crosby, you still have Malkin, you still have Letang, and now you have Erik Karlsson, and that's obviously the core. That's the big core four in Pittsburgh now. Which, man, it's so funny to keep bringing that term up every time it's following Kyle Dubas around the core four.
We will.
Big caveat with Pittsburgh's roster in the early part of the season, because I'm sure you've seen that Jake Gensel had a surgery and is out for 12 weeks, I think it is, or something like that. So he's going to miss like probably 2 months of the season minimum.
And then might take a few weeks to get up to speed.
Right. So that's a big loss. I mean, that's he's
a big part of their offense, honestly, at this point in time.
The biggest problem that the Pittsburgh Penguins have at this point is, like I said, I think it makes them better next year. And to be honest, from the perspective that we tend to come from a Flyers perspective, you should be jumping for joy because you don't want to win games, right? Like everybody who last year was like, well, they won too many games and it took them out, and of course, like in hindsight, it didn't take them out of play for anything that they, necessarily get. It felt like, and you're sitting there looking at next year's draft class, and you're not thinking the same way you did about this year's draft class, like over the whole first round, but you are thinking about that top 5 potential. Because let's put it this way, there's already at least three forward names that everybody would go insane over.
Right.
And you can probably add in at least 2 defensemen who people would go insane over as well. So if you can get into the top 5, you're getting probably cornerstone defenseman or another key forward piece.
Yeah.
And you're moving forward with that.
Hopefully.
So a Pittsburgh team that's in your division that you play with more regularity than some of the other teams, that has Crosby, who's still going to be really good no matter how you splice it, Malkin, who's still going to be able to destroy you on a power play, let's just say, and things like that.
Yep.
Letang, who can still get it done.
As long as he's healthy, he's still a top tier defenseman.
Put those forward. Now Letang's a defenseman, I get it, but put those forward. But put those forwards with Gensel whenever he comes back. Assuming he comes back at full health and capability, but also Brian Rust, Ricard Raquel, Riley Smith is an incoming acquisition now, who wasn't part of the team last year, but comes from the freaking Vegas Golden Knights, who just won a Stanley Cup. Jeff Carter, who at even his age is still productive.
Yep.
You add all of these pieces into place, and that's still a decent team with potential to make the playoffs next year.
Absolutely.
And that's about as far as I go, by the way. Like, I know that everybody wants to jump and go, man, look at that group. Like, look at what you can do when you sit there and you talk about Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, Rust, Smith, Carter, and then Karlsson, Letang as your top 2 defensemen, right? And then you kind of have to pull yourself back and go, yeah, that's on paper, it sure looks like a really strong group.
Sure.
And then don't you wish you had it 5 years ago like that?
Yeah.
Because then you would take, oh man, Jeff Carter at 34 years old, 33, 34, and Crosby at 28, and Gensel at 25, and next thing you know, you're adding it all up, and you're going, man, that's crazy. But look at their ages now. You know what I mean? Like,
but the other thing that you have to mention, and I hate to say it, but he's one of those players.
Yeah,
you put him in the playoffs, it's hard to bet against Sidney Crosby.
It is. No, I know, but
period.
But again, from an asset standpoint, you're trading away your 2024 first round pick to shoot your shot with a 33-year-old defenseman who you just acquired, who's going to be, by the way, making more money than any player on your roster.
Yep.
Immediately. More money than Crosby, more money than Malkin, more money than Letang. He's making more money than all of them. In terms of individual player, number one, because it's a $10 million contract. Crosby's 8.7. You just
by the way, for 4 more seasons.
Oh yeah, for 4 more. I get that.
So he's there.
And the part that I can't forget is you're right. Last year was a big time revival for Karlsson. Huge. To go out and put up 100 points and be one of those rare defensemen who can do it at his age after all of the remember how close to ruined he was after that playoff run in Ottawa
too.
Well, right, but remember how close to ruined he was after that playoff run in Ottawa?
Man, he was mangled.
Injured like crazy, couldn't stay healthy. It was nearly the end of his career.
His hips, his back, his everything.
And that's the big risk with the 33-year-old defenseman who, despite a Norris Trophy winning season,
has also been through car accidents.
Essentially, he's been through so much physically in his career. And he's only 30, like he's only at 33. Realistically speaking, he could have 4 more good years left in him at 33.
Right. Right. How long did Nick Lidstrom play?
Right. But you don't know that, especially with the injury history. And then you throw in Crosby's 36, Malkin's 37, Carter's 30.
They're getting old around them too.
Jeff Carter is 38, Letang is 36. And then, oh, by the way, you sit there and you start to scroll through, and as you go through the rest of the group, you would love to have at least one player who you can sit there and go, he's 24, oh, that's the build around the future thing. But let's keep going. Brian Rust is 31. Ricard Raquel is 30. Riley Smith is 32. Lars Eller, 34. Nola Chari, 31. Finally, you get to Rem Pitlick at 26, and you say, okay, there's a younger guy, but you can't go off of, hey, you know what? The only 3 under 30 forwards on the roster are Rem Pitlick, Drew O'Connor, and Alex Nylander.
By the way, something I wanted to mention, because you've mentioned him a couple times in this little segment here now. Sure. It makes me absolutely sick that Jeff Carter is going to go down in the history books as a Penguin and a friggin' king.
Well, and he's got, I hate to say this because I know people probably don't want to hear it, but to me, he's got the same kind of Hall of Fame case that Rod Brindamore has.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. The numbers just add up. You know what I mean?
God, if they win in 2010, they don't trade him. There's no shot.
Well, and they didn't.
It might ruin the franchise, but
who knows? But
we can't play what if. Maybe on the next show.
Right. And by the way, I don't want to make it sound like I just mentioned those 3 forwards that are under 30. Gensel is 28, so he qualifies as an under 30. But you also have to think about the fact that once the contract for Karlsson's up, which you can only assume is about as far as Crosby and Malkin and Letang are gonna go, because by that point, 4 years from now, they're all 40. That's it. It's over after this particular thing. And to spend what they just did to do this for maybe and I'm not trying to say this is for sure and certain the way it's going to be, but Crosby's got 2 years left on his contract. How do we know that that's not the farewell tour?
I have a feeling it might be. But
I think there's potential. I mean, you know what else comes into play with some of that, to be honest? When you're a player like Sidney Crosby is, who's had the career he's had, and we all know he's going to be a Hall of Famer, he's won 3 cups.
First ballot, yep.
And you watch a guy like Patrice Bergeron just hang him up, and you're 2 years in age behind him, you start thinking, all
right, 2 more years.
Right. And it's not like Crosby's never going to do, geez, for real. Isn't Crosby just going to get another job as soon as he decides I'm done playing? Of course.
He's going to follow in the footsteps of Mario and move right upstairs in the Pittsburgh organization.
But you have to decide when, as the player. You got to decide when. And whether or not that... and listen, I could see Crosby going the other direction. He's still a very productive player. He could ride out the final 2 years of the contract and then say, I'm going to do the 1 year route for a couple of years. I mean, I think Crosby's the type of guy who would want to play until... who would actually strive to
I could see him signing 1 year, $1 million, 1 year, $1 million, 1 year.
Well, and I can see him playing to 40 is my point. I was going to say, he's the type of guy who, because of the way that he still plays, I could see saying, I'll get to 40. I'll stretch this thing out till 40 because he's not hurting a team playing until 40.
I do also see him being the kind of person who, with the amount of damage he's taken in his career, and I'm not wishing it upon him, knock on wood, but one more serious injury, and I could see him going, all right, I'm good. I'm gonna live my life, and I'm gonna retain some of my long-term health, and I'm done. Thank you.
Well, even and again, even though as far as I know anyway, and I mean, you can correct me if you've seen anything different on this, but even though Jonathan Toews hasn't formally said the words retirement,
it seems like that's the case, right?
But does it But you remember when Toews couldn't play for a while because again there was kind of some health issues going on, things like that. Yeah. It makes you think. You're right. One more serious injury, and he might be thinking about I can't do this anymore. I got to think about my health. And don't forget, we're talking about Crosby with 2 years left on his contract and worrying about, that'll take him to 38. Malkin just re-upped last year for 4 years, so he's got 3 years left. That'll take him to 40. And Letang re-upped for 6, and he's got 5 years left, and he's going to go to 41.
That deal is hideous.
And now you've got
Hideous.
and now you've got the Karlsson deal that had at 33 years old.
All those guys are going to develop mysterious long-term injuries.
Potentially, yeah, but then what kind of roster are you throwing after? And that's the point.
No, I mean, when it's time to break it down, in 2 or 3 years, all of them are going to have, but
they've sacrificed as a team. They've sacrificed so much for where they are to be that franchise, to try to get to make one more push with all 3 of the guys who have been there forever, and to try this one more time,
emptying the tank. Absolutely.
And the thing is it's good, pretty much until they end up in the same position where you're picking near the top, they're going to be a franchise that pays for it later. Until you get again, I know people will sit there and say the inevitable, oh, there's the first overall pick that magically happens.
Theoretically, the way both franchises are projecting, it looks like the Flyers and the Penguins are going to miss each other for the next little while. Presumably.
Well, because one's trying to squeeze the rest of the juice out of the core, and the other one is building a core.
Well, right, and the Penguins certainly look like they're willing to, whether they win or not, they're willing to empty the tank, and when these players do call it quits, they're going to suffer for a couple of years. There's not going to be a core there. They're going to be... and obviously Kyle Dubas is a good GM, and if he's still there, he can probably turn it around pretty quickly. But, you are looking at a reset in some way.
Oh, yeah. And that's so this is why. So I want to shift to the signing that I wanted to talk about. And there's a handful I want to touch on, by the way, because there was a couple of key free agents. There was a couple of key free agents that signed. We got a couple of contract extensions that I wanted to get into. And this is one of the contract extensions, by the way. This is not a new contract. But I think you can figure out the player or the team I want to talk about, because it really directly coincides with the Penguins in a lot of ways. Because let's face it, the 2 players that it seemed like the Karlsson trade, we immediately go into Crosby's career, right? Because it coincides with what will probably be the end of Crosby's career. The whole package of Karlsson's timeline with the contract that he's got and all that, it seems like it coincides with Crosby's final years of his career.
Yeah.
That a 4-year window to where he's 40. And there's another team who, again, we're going to take the implications of the signing that they made and look at a totally different player who's the cornerstone. And again, about squeezing out as much as you can with this and whatnot. So do you have any clue who I'm talking about?
I don't.
Tom Wilson.
Oh, okay.
Because it's Washington.
Yeah.
Because it's the same concept.
I forgot about that extension. Okay.
So let me read off the terms of that deal first before we get in, because again, this was another contract extension done a year early, so it didn't have to happen this offseason. So Tom Wilson got a 7-year extension with a $6.5 million average annual value with the Washington Capitals. That will take him, he is currently age 29, and that will take him 8 more years now. So he signed for the next 8 years. So you can do the math. That will take him into his late 30s.
Yep.
That will take a player of his style into his late 30s, meaning, yes, he can score a few, a few goals, but he also is very rough and tumble and physical and,
Well, and we are a fan base that just watched Wayne Simmons kind of deteriorate pretty quickly.
Sure. And a lot of the immediate reaction to a move like this was, this is so clearly about keeping the group around that can help Ovechkin get to the goal record.
Oh, sure.
And I'm not denying that they're not they're not a decent team with the group that they have. If you look on paper at the fact that, and this is everybody who signed for the upcoming season: Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Oshie, Mantha, Wilson, Strome. You add in there's a couple pieces below that, but those are really the main guys. And then defensively, it's still Karlsson, Jensen, Van Riemsdyk, Faravari. They still have Rasmus Sandin under contract that they got last year, which I think was still a good trade for them. A guy who is 23,
right.
That's also a good one. So you have all of those guys, and that's the thing. Those are the pieces that they're kind of relying on to make them a good enough team. And again, remember, both teams we're talking about here, Pittsburgh and Washington, didn't make the playoffs last year. That's really important to remember in this, because you're trying to do things that can hopefully make you better, but also at the same time, it's very clear that already we saw the shift between where they were and where they're going potentially. Like you can be at the top for a while. You can be at the top for over a decade, for 10 to 15 years.
Yep.
And eventually it's got to kind of fall, because that star player is going to be closer and closer to being on the way out. And
absolutely, we saw it with the Detroit Red Wings. They held on and they held on and they held on, and they traded for assets, and they clawed to keep that playoff streak alive. They got it for 25 years, and then everybody retired, and they really fell off for half a decade.
Yeah, and I just think that in both cases, between whether it's the Karlsson trade or the Wilson extension, that these are two deals, however you want to terminize it, to blend it together, transactions that are probably fine for the early going of both, that they will do what they hope to accomplish in the next handful of years, but probably won't age well.
Well, and you're hoping, especially a team like Washington, around Tom Wilson, you're hoping that the cap goes up, your big names start to fall off as they start retiring, and then his contract becomes a little more manageable with a smaller percentage of the cap.
I do want to say one thing about the Wilson thing is that I don't think it's a bad contract from the money value at all. Honestly,
no.
He scores more than the average physical player.
It just didn't need to be 7 years.
Well, because I don't even know if you're getting 7 years out of him, because again,
if it's 4, is there a problem if it's 4 or 5? Probably not.
It's better. I don't even know if you're getting that much. Is my point. Like,
I think you're getting 4 more years out of Tom Wilson. He's not that old.
Yeah, but he did also have a major surgery before last season too, and that's the thing. Like,
that's fair.
If you wear down the body enough, like I'm worried about. He's 29, like I just said. I'm worried about Wayne Simmons. Fell apart at 33, 34 years old.
You're not right.
I'm worried about that if I'm Washington.
So I did want to mention a re-signing that will age incredibly well.
I know it. I already hope I know which one you're talking about, because it's the top one on my list. Anyway.
Holy crow. The Carolina Hurricanes, and an absolute steal, getting Sebastian Aho for...
Oh, we already did that one.
Did we already?
That was last show. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you were talking about the fact that avoiding arbitration, Troy Terry in Anaheim, 7 years, $7 million is going to age very well for them.
That one is also going to age very well. The money, it might be a touch high, but I think it's okay.
With the cap, I think it'll be okay.
Well, and I think Anaheim, quite frankly, has to overpay people a little tiny bit right now just to keep them happy, because you've been so bad.
I'll tell you which one I can't wait to see as a follow-up, because it's not happening yet, but it will eventually. I can't wait. What do you think that Trevor Zegras' first contract following the early years is going to be? You know what I mean?
See.
Like, I got to think the money is going to be it's probably over 8. Don't you think? 8.5?
It depends on when they get it done. I think that's one of those ones that you want to sign it the second you're eligible to.
Sure.
Every game you let him play after that is going to cost you money.
Yeah. So because we're not looking to do too much more here, we have we do have one quick Flyers note to get to. But before we do that, I did have 3 really quick hitters on signings, and then one that I actually really wanted to actually bring up because it was a little bit more substantial, I'll say. So
sure.
The quick hitters are Pia Suter signed with Vancouver, Caleb Jones signed with Carolina, former Flyer Martin Jones signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is interesting to say the least.
All short-term deals, guys,
nothing
just finding
big
spots.
But here's one I actually wanted to bring up with more substance than just the average mention, because this was a free agent that was high on a lot of lists and then finally signed with maybe a team not everybody thought he would go to, I guess. How about Matt Dumba getting a 1-year deal for just under $4 million, $3.9 million with Arizona?
Yeah, honestly, I thought Carolina was going to look at him once they fell out of the Erik Karlsson trade or sweepstakes.
Yeah.
But the fact that he ended up in Arizona kind of makes sense to me, because I think they need NHL players. And Matt Dumba's an NHL player. Oh, yeah,
he is. They've made some additions that are really interesting this offseason, though. Like they think more like a formidable team than they did last year.
They are dangerously approaching being a real NHL team. Yeah, it's interesting. No, I don't think they're going to be very good. I don't think they're going to come anywhere near a playoff spot. I don't think they're going to win more than probably about 30, 35 games. But they will be better than last year.
But see, this is exactly where I'm going, because what you just said is exactly fair, because now all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, call me crazy, but that's not a bad team.
Well, you're starting to put a skeleton together so that when you get the stars and the stars start rolling in, you can start slotting them in. Like, you're filling out the rest of your roster now, so when the big boys roll in, you're ready to go.
Like, that was the thing. Like, they bring him in now, too, after, like, they've had already a decent offseason to begin with, and it's like, you know? Like, I don't want to jump so far to go, hey, they could possibly be a playoff team, but, like, I don't think they're bad. Like, I don't know if they're... I mean, are they...
Matt Dumba is a great trade asset for them, assuming they're out of it. And
that's fair.
Looking at the deadline, he only signed a 1-year deal. It's a number that they can get down super low, super easily.
It's best of both worlds for them, because it really is like... You could either be a way better team. Yeah, you could either be a way better team. You could either be a way better team with him this year, or you could not be as good of a team as you thought, and you still get great value for him. Absolutely, 1,000% over.
Speaking of great value, let's talk about that Tony DeAngelo trade one more time, because. So basically, if you're not paying attention, that rumored trade for Tony DeAngelo ended up happening in the most complicated, convoluted, distorted way possible.
It happened in the most stick it to the league way possible.
Somehow, Tony DeAngelo, or like this trade was for previous considerations.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's never happened before. But so Tony DeAngelo finds his way to Carolina. The Flyers have a roster or a salary cap penalty. The Philadelphia Flyers also received the same assets back that they were going to get in the original deal. They made the trade. Pretty much.
And the belief is, because this was talked about a little bit on Snow the Goalie on Crossing Broad. Anthony Sanfilippo was talking about this a little bit. Everything that was in this deal was in the original deal.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Like, well, no, because I didn't know about the 5th round pick part as much. Yep. Like, we had heard the name Massimo Rizzo before.
I thought we knew about the 5th round pick.
No, I don't remember there being a pick involved in the deal per se.
I thought I remembered hearing that, but maybe I'm wrong. But either way, the deal gets done eventually.
So it involves a couple extra pieces, like we said. So the 5th round pick was something that we weren't talking about as much, and Carolina getting the rights to David Kase, who... For people who may not remember, was called up by the Flyers like 3 years ago prior to the bubble.
It looks okay.
Scored his first NHL goal against the Anaheim Ducks that one time. You know, like
he's a guy that kind of just got rocked by the whole COVID thing, not because he had it or anything, but just the situation of the world shutting down.
Well, and then because the year after he played one game with them, and then he played the last 2 seasons in Czechia. So like,
that's what I'm saying.
As soon as you go over and start playing in Europe, you kind of aren't factoring into a team's plans as much.
It's tough, yeah.
And the Rizzo thing is fascinating in and of itself, because he plays for the University of Denver.
Somebody get that man an apartment in South Philly, stat.
Well, yeah, I know, right?
Massimo Rizzo.
Yeah, okay.
Come on.
Yes, he does have the perfect Italian
Gabagool
for Philly. I get that. But in all seriousness, from a hockey standpoint, he had a solid year at Denver last year, 17 goals, 46 points in 38 games. And it still technically only qualified as his sophomore season. So he's still got years of eligibility to go back. And as far as I know, that's the intention, is that he's going to go back. There was some stuff out there that he was like going to sign like this week or this past week, or whatever. And it's like, I don't know about that. I don't know. Because here's the thing. Does he have a spot on the AHL roster?
No.
Right. So I think right now the benefit is send him back to college.
Sure, he's got the eligibility. Use it. And the whole way along, before the draft, when this trade got leaked, we talked about this being a lottery ticket type of prospect. We're not expecting a whole lot out of this guy, but if he turns into something, he turns into something.
Exactly. And I think that You're taking a chance. You're going to see what happens. I think there's a reason to believe that they may sign him like following a junior season. Like he would play his junior season in college, and then you start talking, because Denver's a good program. We know this.
Absolutely.
There's a connection with Bobby Brink a little bit, because that's where Bobby Brink went to college and all that type of stuff. So again, you've got a couple of things that kind of go in line here, and we'll see. But it was just funny how it all kind of came together and the way that it came together, because it really was a big, like, let's stick it to the league kind of thing. Like, that they kind of had a handshake agreement that, despite the fact that the original trade never happened and it resulted in a buyout, which, by the way, benefited both teams more.
Yep.
The Flyers keep a retention spot for salary for a trade in the future.
Don Waddell and Danny Briere, petty kings.
And Carolina got him for cheaper.
Yep.
And then they still got what they wanted from the trade anyway. So, and if nothing, like, the reason that I brought up the 5th round pick is because of the fact that it's like, you know what? Good on Danny Briere for getting a pick out of that instead of just, hey, rights to a player for a player that you were otherwise going to buy out. Like, you know, like, good for getting something that actually in your current state has value.
Sure.
You know, more than just a lottery ticket prospect.
Even just that 5th round pick, like, that's a huge asset.
Yeah, and it is in 2025. So you've got, you know, but again, any pick over the next 2 years is good. Right. Yeah. Any pick over the next 2 years is a good pick. So good on you for making a trade like that actually has the benefits of both sides involved.
Absolutely.
And that's really like, and listen, we're stretching talking about this because it's the only stuff we can talk about in August.
And you know that, honestly, there's not even really any reason to stretch it. We talked about it before the show. It's vacation time. You know, if you're dropping news now, you're a jerk. So
really quick before we get out of here, then there is one piece of news that may be coming soon.
Okay.
Because there were reports out that a decision on what happens with Ivan Fedotov's contract could be out on Monday. So I do want to make sure that that's out there, like, or that we at least bring that up, because it's not something we're going to talk about until the next time around. I don't, you know, and again, I don't want to say it's definitely happening on Monday either. I mean, there's a good possibility, but I don't want to assume that it's completely, but I can certainly feel like I can assume it's going to be this week. So,
well, and the best way to find out about that will be following Kevin on social media at Kevin_Durso. Follow the show as well at YWT Podcast. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including at sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like button, share with your friends. I don't know how this whole thing works. And that being said, we're just about out of here. We got 2 weeks until our next show. We're working on getting back. We'll be back in the rhythm soon. Go Phils. We'll be back soon. See ya.